I was reflecting, certain things happened during the week, and it kind of gives me cause to pause and remember certain aspects that I know well, but it seems that those aspects, might not be as important. And then I remember they really are. So all that to say, I thought today that we would have a look at a topic that causes a lot of problems for people. And it isn't a problem that generally individuals who are living in hoarded environments themselves have. It's a cause that is kind of legacied to them. So I wanted to spend a little time today talking about the top 8 misconceptions about hoarding, right? There is so much incorrect, unfounded information out there that forms the beliefs of people who watch those TV shows, or people who their only experience with hoarding is that they know someone or they care about someone who hoards, and then they apply that very limited experience to all hoarding, right? The difficulty is that that kind of urban legend junk information has a way of getting accepted as fact, when in fact, it's anything but the truth. The reason I want to make this topic, our topic today, is that I was reminded this week a number of times just how much people get hurt by these misconceptions, this false information that is accepted as truth. And how that was kind of brought in stark relief to me again this week were the number of people who were suffering the effects of the cringe factor of that misinformation. And it causes real pain for individuals, pain and shame. And so it kind of was ironic as well that our topic last week was problematic thinking styles, because I realized that actually all of those people who are holding on to this misinformation, operating from misconceptions, applying it to statements they make or approaches they make with loved ones or family or themselves perhaps, they have a problematic thinking style. And I wanted to bring that back to everybody joining in today to say, you can see that it isn't just people who hoard or people with any other type of mental health challenge who have thinking that could use some readjusting. That problematic thinking style that these people are using falsely is called projection, or generalizing from a limited experience. They know this much about hoarding because they watch all the TV shows, or they know one person. And then they spread that, they talk in judgmental terms and in extreme terms. So let's start going through the 8 misconceptions, the 8 primary misconceptions. Misconception number 1, hoarding is associated with either having gone through the Great Depression or having parents who went through the Great Depression, who have passed on the effects of that profound deprivation and food insecurity or product insecurity. That is not so. All right, it has nothing to do with the Great Depression. Many millions of people who hoard, who create a hoarded environment, live through the Depression. All right, and they had parents who did. In fact, the vast majority of people who lived through the Great Depression, don't hoard. I want to remind you of two concepts that we've talked about in the past. And these concepts are really, really important. The first is that there is such a thing as adaptive hoarding. That's when people acquire and they keep a supply of items because they know, based on their own personal experience, that they will actually use them. For example, people may stock up on something when it goes on sale. There's nothing wrong with that. Or when it's available for free. But they do actually use these things throughout their daily life. And they do it, here's the key, before the items reach their expiration date or otherwise deteriorate. Okay? Why are they able to keep a supply of items and actually use them in time and others can't? There are a lot of good reasons. Some of these have to do with you folks as well who are coming here because you're feeling overwhelmed by things. They are able to do this because they may have personal values or a commitment not to waste. So they buy in the supply that they have experientially come to understand is the maximum that they're likely to need. All right, they have that sense of predictive limit. They may also have strong environmental beliefs and they're committed to intensive recycling. So if they find that things are going to go beyond their expiration date by a fair amount, they might offer them to friends or family. They may also have a desire to be efficient by using things for alternative uses. But here's the thing, they use them up. So those flats of tins of soup or toilet paper or whatever it is, they find an alternative use for it. They may do in their freezer. They've bought food ahead on sale. They may go ahead and cook it up and mix the soup and find a recipe that takes those ingredients or something like it. They produce it, then they freeze it. So they avoid the wasting. They avoid losing it, all right? But they use it. There may be other personal or practical reasons for their acquiring behavior, but their pattern of behavior, and here is the key, is that things actually get used in the numbers that are acquired. And the supplies rotate regularly. They don't add another supply of flats of soup or frozen goods in on top of what is already there. They rotate them. People who hoard adaptively honor the things. They also honor their own values and beliefs, and they do it by carrying out the purpose for which they acquired these items and kept them in the first place. They also carry out the intent of the things for the reasons that those things were created and their intent in acquiring them. So it's a twofold carrying out purpose. Whatever they're acquiring had an intended function that gets honored, that gets used. And their own purpose in acquiring them, to have them and use them, that gets honored as well, all right? Remember that every person who clutters does not necessarily go on to hoard. But conversely, every single person that I have worked with over almost 20 years has told me that they started out by creating clutter. So clutter is a dangerous sign. The fact that you're considering even being here today tells me that you want to move closer to adaptive acquiring, adaptive hoarding versus what has happened, which is maybe more maladaptive hoarding and things have gotten ahead of you. Maladaptive or compulsive hoarding, and it can become compulsive. Not all maladaptive hoarding is compulsive, but when it goes on for a long time and it becomes a pattern that you can't easily interrupt, it can become compulsive. All right. Compulsive just means you do it automatically. You see the sale, got to get it, okay, and you don't factor in what your current supply is. All right, that's the topic that we discuss in Conquer the Clutter, Sue, in my book. Whatever the perceived intent of acquiring, this is with maladaptive hoarding or saving, that purpose or intent breaks down. And the result of that breaking down, the intent of getting the things, creates the hoarded environment. So the hoarded environment is really the byproduct of the process of your intent breaking down. The purpose you had breaks down. How does that happen? Okay, there are many reasons that this happens. And there are many accompanying complicating factors that make not hoarding, even harder. Okay. So for the rest of our talk today, we're going to assume that we're talking about maladaptive or compulsive hoarding. Okay. All right. Misconception number 2. Hoarding is caused by experiencing significant loss. Sometimes, but not necessarily so. There's no linear correlation necessarily, okay? Loss is part of life. But remember, we've talked about this before. It's a difficult time. Grief is a difficult time. Loss and disappointment is a difficult time. It sucks the energy out of us. It sucks our ability to focus clearly enough to carry out our plans and our goals. But at a certain point, we all, myself included, okay, I did not have happy thoughts about 15 Bell reps that I talked to. I assigned a meaning, all right, which is why I told you that story. Okay, we all attribute a meaning, our own meaning, to the things that happen to us. When life takes a downturn, most people experience a sense of loss, even if it's not necessarily grief. But most of us don't hoard as a result. Those who do might possibly have a lower threshold for feelings of loss. Okay, it might be a bigger owie. It might be a bigger, more consistent event. You can only tolerate so many downturns in a row. You can only tolerate so many losses in a row. Remember that third path to hoarding? And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. That being a little disorganized chronically or significantly disorganized. It's a real battle to stay organized. And then something happens. A destabilizing event happens. Could be a positive event as well. Nothing says it has to be a negative event. You could get a new job. You could, I know of a very high functioning professional whose job changed, and suddenly she had to fly all over the place all the time. And lo and behold, she didn't have time, energy, or the focus left over to unpack. And so where she came in with her bags started to be a highly accumulated area. And before too long, the next trip, and it just built on one another. That's a positive event as well. It doesn't have to be negative. It just is disruptive. It's disruptive to your considered functioning, all right? So maybe individuals who end up creating a hoarded environment have a lower threshold for the feelings of loss or setback. Or as we all do at certain times, they might assign an overwhelming meaning to situations that involve loss. My clinical working hypothesis is consistent with a point that was made in a study that's outlined in the American Journal of Psychiatry. I'll tell you a little bit about it. It is possible, this is not the Bible on this topic, okay? But it might be possible that traumatic experiences or other environmental risk factors interact. So both things, there has to be like the perfect storm, a constellation of events that build on one another, that individuals, remember we talked about the chromosomes as well, those 4 chromosomes with markers in common, that might interact with particular genes to precipitate compulsive hoarding. So maybe if you're one of those people who, unbeknownst to you, has a marker on chromosome 14, that's that familial pattern of some degree of OCD, or there are 3 other chromosomes with markers in common as well. Maybe that perfect storm, if you happen to have markers on those genes, creates that tipping point for you. It doesn't mean you're doomed to this. It just means your antenna needs to say, stop beating yourself up. Work from your strength. It doesn't matter how many markers you have on how many chromosomes, folks. You still have strengths. Rather than reminding yourself of how you're failing and how you're, let's add all the negative shaming words, should, all right? You're shooting yourself to death. You're shooting yourself into overwhelmed. What are your strengths? And we're going to finish up later on reminding you, what are your needs? Respect yourself. Treat yourself with compassion and respect, no matter what situation you're in. It's possible, and the study was done by, and I'll spell the researcher's name, Iervolino et al. And it's in the American Journal of Psychiatry, 2009, pages 1159 and 1160. So if you're interested, look that up, all right? Now, sometimes the debilitating effect of loss or setback is actually a measure of how significantly you experienced it, given the constellation of other events. The same losses at different times under different conditions often have a very different effect on us. All right, look at COVID as a perfect example. How many people are feeling isolated from people they would love to give a hug to? Hands up. How many people? Okay, I think I might have 2 windows here. We have 44 people so far today. I've got 2 windows where people, and some people have 2 hands up. All right, like we're all feeling that deprivation. Okay, that sets us up. Now, if you're trying to get a bell line installed on top of that, you have another risk factor. All right, trying to add a little levity. All right, it can be whatever the frustration, whatever the other negative events are, and life continues to send them to us. Hopefully, we keep our sense of humor at some point. Okay, sometimes a smaller series. Sometimes it isn't one big event. It can bring you to your knees, all right, one big event. Sometimes, though, it isn't about one big event. It's just that daily happenstance, the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And they're not major. It's just like, will this never stop? Give me a break, because you're already feeling, all right? And so you can't, they're happening or at a certain point, you're tired out. You're used up. All right. You've got like very little cushioning left. And so the smallest thing is like, what again? And you don't have time to restabilize. There's the question though, on a daily basis, regardless, unless you have had like a major tsunami standard setback, all right? How are you managing? How are you balancing your mental and physical health needs? Because that's the foundation of you being able to cope with tomorrow's little challenge, built on yesterday's little challenge, built on the day before. If you do not take responsibility for knowing what your physical needs are, what your mental health needs are, and getting enough of those needs met by whatever legal means you can, you're setting yourself up to be wiped out of the game, really, really overwhelmed, okay? So it's not just life that sends us this. We can create a rich environment for overwhelmed by not taking responsibility for knowing what our physical and mental health needs are and taking care of them, getting as many of those needs met as well as we can. We have a personal responsibility piece in this as well. So if you go back to Conquer the Clutter, all right, and read the 3 paths, all right, so that being chronically disorganized or just a little all the time, fighting to stay on top of it, and then becoming vulnerable, all right. Sometimes people report that there's a period of their life when things began to build up. What was happening? Learn from the setbacks so that you don't ever have to repeat them, all right? If you have to experience a setback, make it count. Drill down on it. Sit down with a cup of tea or a glass of wine, whatever your ilk is, and figure out, where did this go wrong? What is it about this time in my life where the buildup started? What was going on then? And how was I handling it? Would I recognize those types of events again? Because we do tend to repeat things, patterns. We all do that. I do it too. We tend to repeat patterns in the absence of learning from them. I say I'm going to make an endless list of mistakes in my life. I just accept that right out of the gate. Here's my ambition, that I don't ever make the same mistake twice. Okay? Because that seems to me to be a supreme waste of the gift of my life. But I'm going to make mistakes today, and I'm going to make mistakes tomorrow. But I'm going to try really, really hard to take personal responsibility for figuring out what part I played in it. And that piece, I'm going to work really hard to work out and not repeat. So we're talking about regular processing of what is happening in our life up here. Remember, we said last week, the person who manages their mind has the largest influence on the system that they are trying to make work for them. And that could be your sorting process. That could be making yourself engage for 15 minutes a day. The person who manages their mind has the largest influence on the system. How are you going to take responsibility to help yourself some today by doing that? All right. All right. The other thing too is we can only deal with what we feel competent and adequately resourced to deal with. Otherwise, you know what happens? When we're overwhelmed, denial, distraction, and avoidance, procrastination, are common coping strategies. Are we doing that? Are we reverting to that because we're not taking responsibility for assessing what were the components of that situation that did not work out that well for us yesterday and today? And what was our part in that? Are we engaging in any of the 10 or 11 problematic thinking styles that we talked about last week? Are we? If you can't remember what they are, go back and listen to that podcast again. Take notes, because if you can keep your head above water on those problematic thinking styles, you're really arming yourself very well to head off making something, the next incoming event, or overwhelming or more overwhelming. Okay? All right. So now let's go on to misconception number 3. Hoarded environments mean that the person must be a compulsive hoarder. Not necessarily so. There are situations in which someone with no discernible risk factors for compulsive hoarding has a hoarded environment. There are 2 types of situations that stand out in my experience. The first is aging with mobility issues. I can't tell you how many requests I've had for help from seniors or people who have physical illness or physical disabilities, where there's no measurable or observable psychological factors related to hoarding being a factor. The problem for most of these people turned out to be either cognitive, acquired brain injury, stroke, or mobility limitations related to aging or being physically less abled. In addition, they were extremely reluctant to call for help because they were afraid someone would determine that they shouldn't be living independently, and they wanted at all costs to maintain their independence. That would just be one loss too much. The hoarded environment was the byproduct of those 2 factors. The second situation where I've seen this happen is managing inherited items while grieving acutely. Okay. Sometimes when people inherit items after the death of a person who was close enough to them, while they're still in a state of acute grief, they sometimes can't see any other options other than to bring the excessive numbers of things into their own environment, thereby creating a hoard. All right. Quite often, I've been told by these people grieving, they don't even necessarily like or want the items, but they feel a tremendous responsibility by being these items bequeathed to them. All right. And they're just not in a state where they can physically or emotionally make the necessary decisions to sort out and dispose of them. In those types of situations, generally what I suggest is that they, if they haven't already brought the items home into their own environment, that they get movers and they move whatever items that are not their own, were not there originally, or that don't fit really, really easily. If they think they want to keep those few items, they take them to storage, and they wait within 6 months when the grieving starts to abate a little, and then they have a little more mental space, they have a little more ability to sort out who they are today moving forward versus what their responsibility is, or their perceived responsibility is to the wishes of whoever bequeathed these items to them. All right. because at this point in acute grief, they're not ready. They're to let go, and they fail to consider other options. All right. So when this happens, respect. If this has happened to you, and you're able to identify the items that need to go to storage, and give yourself a date that you will start working on those things. All right. Because safety is first. Safety is always first. All right. Misconception number 4. If a person hoards, they must be crazy, or they wouldn't live like this. Not necessarily so. Okay. Not so, in fact. The term crazy depicts attitudes, okay, that I have almost never, like rarely encountered in the people I've worked with. The fact is that all of us, myself included, mental health and wellness is a continuum that on especially bad days, none of us scores terribly high on. Okay. All right. We all, every day with every situation, positive and negative, move up and down that continuum regularly. Okay. Just because you hoard doesn't mean you're crazy. All right. Everybody in life gets something, and that reason that you give yourself to acquire or to hold on to things or to fail to make the decisions is that's your work. That's your work. That's all it means. All right. And things get in the way. All right. And we could look at some pretty famous people and realize that no one who hoards, all right, is in any worse condition than some very famous people. All right. So it doesn't mean you're crazy. Okay. The better question to ask yourself is, how well are you altogether now managing your physical and mental health needs? How well are you managing those? All right. I liken life to something like a cup, where we're all walking around with our cups already partially full, sloshing away. What would it take for each one of us to upset that balance and overload ourselves or underload ourselves? Let that balance become depleted because we promise our life away. We promise our time. We promise our energy. We promise our whole spiritual health as well, the thing, that spirit that drives us. All right, we just take it for granted. And then you end up that you're like this much in the cup. And the next guy needs help, and the next guy needs something. And you know, you're over here, you're over there, promising yourself away, not keeping enough for good self-management and good self-care. You're taking for granted your mental health. You're taking for granted your physical and spiritual health. You got nothing left. How's that going to work for you? Or you're assigning meaning, you're not processing, you're not getting the help you need, and the cup is overflowing. Not with bounty, it's overflowing with stress. What would it take for any of us to become so overwhelmed to the extent that we become indecisive? Isn't that really where many people who are with me today are? You have the intent, but at some point when you approach the actual mental, cognitive, and physical job of deciding, you become indecisive. Okay. And then that creates avoidance or distraction. And as a result of that, what do we create? More of what we don't want. All right. Those piles, even if they're not getting bigger, they're not getting smaller. Right? And then, do you judge yourself for that? Do you walk by and go, oh, what's wrong with that? Just, That's not good for you. That is not good for you. All right? Where's that balance? All right. Too much or too little of anything can upset the wellness balance. Mental health, physical health, spiritual health. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about that thing that drives our will to live, our spirit. All right? The spirit that each of us has, our life force. Choose consciously. Consider well and hard what you add to your cup and how much, as well as what you allow to drain you, so that that cup, your life force, your combination of energies, stays in a relatively good, sustainable, supportive balance. You owe yourself that. All right. Nobody else can give that to you. You are the only one who can give that away by the decisions you make. Okay. So it really boils down to practical ways to make choices consciously and give yourself permission to set boundaries and limits that meet your needs, all right, at any point in time before you find yourself either overextended or overwhelmed. Boundaries and limits, giving yourself permission. You're entitled to those. Misconception number 5. Those who create a hoarded environment must be messy and dirty. All the TV shows say so. It's just good television, folks. It isn't reality. You would never, ever intervene in the ways. It makes my head spin sometimes when I see it. I think, how is that going to help? All right. Not so. Sometimes the hoarded environment, many times the hoarded environment that I'm working in is meticulously clean and tidy and well organized. So what's the problem, you ask? The main issues are the excessive accumulation and the failure to let go in a way that maintains a safe environment, safety first. Hoarding does interfere with access to spaces intended for particular daily living use and activities. All right. And then the quality of your life suffers. Also, it creates a fuel load because many of those items are combustible. And it creates a fuel load even though it can be, the environment itself can be neat and clean. All right. Well organized even. You and your hoarded environment may not create the crisis that results in the fire. But fact is, your excessive fuel load will make the fire spread faster for you, limiting the time for you to get out, but also limiting the time for others who live in close proximity, your neighbors who share a wall, or a ceiling or a floor if you're in a multi-unit dwelling. That fire, whatever the setback, is going to spread faster and worse. This reality, it greatly lessens the time. Remember, I was talking to you, I believe it was in 2 podcasts ago, about the fumes get you before, not the smoke, the fumes get you before anything else. Okay, misconception number 6. People who hoard can't discard. Not so. Some people who hoard discard just fine, but what they never do is they never balance the volume of what they're acquiring or keeping with what they're discarding. That's the bottom line. As a result, a bottleneck gets created, either massive acquiring, saving, failure to resolve by making decisions and letting go. All right. So somewhere on that continuum, those 3 points, there's a bottleneck. That bottleneck creates the hoarded environment. The only difference from the experience of those who have trouble discarding, but they don't really acquire too much, is the length of time it's going to take for the hoard to build. All right. So an example of that is you really don't acquire much more than anybody else, but when you acquire it, you have a compelling need to save it, to get your value out of it. Whatever it is you're saying to yourself, you save it. All right. Some people, that's not where they have a problem. They don't save it anymore. It's just that by accident, by distraction, they don't intend to save it. They just don't make a decision. It's like they put blinders on and they don't see what there actually is there, and they keep adding to it by the next sale. And it might not be too much. The only thing, and some people, they don't acquire too much. They have no intent to save it. They just can't make themselves make decisions and actually finish the job. They intend to do it. They do intend to do it. They have every intention of doing it, but that last step doesn't get completed. You can see where the only thing that changes is how quickly that hoarded environment is going to get created. But a problem at any one of those 3 points on that continuum, sooner or later, given enough time, a hoarded environment is going to get created. There's no best spot to have a problem. All right, there are 3 essential points. One is the accumulation, the rate at which it's coming in, the saving. How long does it sit around? Noticed or unnoticed? And then the resolution. The resolution has a number of pathways. Making decisions is exhausting. That's why I tell you 15 minutes a day when you're getting started. But every day, like brushing your teeth, all right, every day. Sometimes the decisions can be made, but the actual physical loading of the stuff or arranging for somebody to come and pick it up and take it away, that becomes the problem. All right, whatever the problem, if you're having problems at that resolution stage, you're not acquiring a lot, you don't have a problem with saving things and giving yourself good reasons to hold on to things when probably it's not your best choice. If it's at that resolution stage, please send me an email and we will do a whole podcast on increasing the effectiveness of the resolution stage. Okay? So some people who hoard can discard just fine. The pattern of acquiring, saving, and discarding varies from person to person, affecting how much time it takes for that hoarded environment, for the life cycle of a hoarded environment to be created. All right? Okay. There is an ebb and flow to the level of hoarding depending on the number of accumulated items arriving or leaving. When acquiring adaptively to meet an actual need, those things will leave or get used up. All right. Okay, so let's go on to the next. Just here somewhere. All right. It's here somewhere, folks. Misconception number 7. Okay. There is no good reason. This is what people say. Just do a little bit every day, which is not like the 15 minutes, okay? There's no good reason that you just can't get organized and clean up a little bit every day and stay on top of it. Don't you just hate cheap advice? All right. That is not the same thing as take responsibility for starting to help yourself self-regulate. The person who manages their mind has the greatest influence on the system. That 15 minutes a day regularly, not 16 minutes, not 14 minutes, not 2 hours because you got on a roll, 15 minutes a day is not equivalent to that cheap advice, because that 15 minutes a day is you helping to develop that self-regulation, that when you make a deal to yourself, you keep your word to yourself. You actually are creating a skill that helps you meet any goal you want to set for yourself, even those having nothing to do with hoarding. It's a good thing. That's a really good thing. All right. So people who hoard have difficulty addressing the problem for many good reasons. All right. Kathy, a former client of mine at one point said to me, now apparently, I think it was, who wrote Huckleberry Finn? Can't think of it right now. Anyway, that denial is not just a river in Egypt. That when people are having difficulty facing something, they go into either denial, avoidance, distraction, or overwhelmed. All right. We all know that's kind of like the perfect recipe for procrastination, right? We also know, okay, procrastination is not a dirty word. Procrastination is actually quite often, usually in fact, an unconscious choice. It's a choice, right? That saves us from looking at something that is an even bigger negative for us. What is it? What is that boogeyman, okay, that we are afraid to look at? What is it? Okay. Generally, the things we're afraid of are bigger in our imagination than they ever are in real life. Let's find out for each one of you what that boogeyman is that brings you here, okay? And then let's face it down. Right? We only ask ourselves the questions that we feel able to accept or deal with. If the answer feels too difficult, we avoid, distract, procrastinate, because those reactions, they give us relief. All right? That it feels good. It's like you've closed the door on the boogeyman. And they can begin to become habits that feel like allies. They're not allies. They're depriving you of reaching your goals in life. Those goals are the whole foundation of your happiness, the meaning in your life, the things that will give you what will make life feel worthwhile to you. Okay. Denial and procrastination will buffer us from bigger fears. Being overwhelmed interferes with the mental tools we need the most. That's our executive function. When we continue to do that to the point, avoidance, distraction, procrastination, what we're really doing is making the executive function part of our brain like mud. All right. This is our command central, because this part, that executive function part of our brain, is the very part of our brain that puts things for us, each one of us, in our own creative way, in a workable order to help us do things. Something simple like sorting things out and finishing step by step, a plan. All right. Okay. So what do? Think things through to arrive at better options. The executive function part of our brain helps us decide on what is a viable, doable, developable plan. And then it helps us step by step follow through to conclusion. It helps us problem solve because there are going to be boulders on that path. All right, they get over the little hiccups. What do? Slow down. Put away the should shovel. All right, that's not going to get you anywhere. That's just going to, if you're not in deep enough, it's going to dig you in even deeper and you're going to feel worse about yourself. So put away the should shovel. All right, slow down. Sounds inconsistent, doesn't it? But slow down. Take a few deep breaths. Give your whole body the oxygen it needs. You are a machine. What fuel are you using? Adrenaline? Not a good fuel. Okay, that's going to burn you out faster than grease lightning. The more frustrated and overwhelmed we get, the worse this works. And the worse the problem seems to become. The operative word there is seems to become. We can make this problem overwhelming if we give it enough adrenaline, right? Try oxygen. Work from your strength. Okay. It can feel like you're walking through mud up to your knees. Would you expect, if that's the chemical fuel you're giving your brain to help you sort this out and keep you going so that next step doesn't feel overwhelming? Is it a surprise that you've come to a grinding halt? It isn't a surprise to me. That is the natural course of working on adrenaline. It runs out and then you are in the dumps. All right. You've got nothing when you've burned yourself out on adrenaline. Okay. Too many clients tell me that when they try to force themselves without having a plan, right, without having enough sleep, eating properly, meeting enough of their needs, they can't figure out what to do with even the first item that they pick up. Okay. So if you're at this point, you may feel deflated. You certainly are feeling frustrated. Okay, and maybe overwhelmed. Are you feeling like you're a little bit in a fog and like your head is spinning at a certain point when you look at this stuff? Like, oh no, it's still there. Oh, like, there must be something else I should be doing. All right, that would make me feel better about myself. Promise yourself, okay, 15 minutes a day. All right. But folks, when you're in a blind maze and you can't figure the way out, get a guide. Okay. Reach out for hoarding informed help. The hoarding informed help could be those podcasts free of charge. Doesn't have to come with a cost or a dollar amount attached to it. Start working your way through those podcasts that are already, I think there may be 43 of them that are already posted online free. All right. Go on hoarding.ca and look at the resources that are there. Some of the resources that are there, apparently, my IT person has told me that some of them end up in, I think she called it an error page, but I'm talking to her later on this afternoon and we're going to figure out what that error page is and correct it. Something's gone wonky, but we'll get it corrected. Okay? That can be your guide. If you're sick and tired of trying to work it out on your own, where is the help you need? All right. Misconception number 8. I'm not a hoarder because I'm not as bad as the people on television. No, I'm not. I'm a collector. not a hoarder. Perhaps not, okay? Hoarding is just the outward manifestation of how you're feeling inside. There's no magic, there's no shame, right? Some of the loveliest, truly loveliest people I've ever met hoard. Okay? When you review the DSM-5 definition or the working definition that we've covered in one of the first podcasts, or you take the quiz, okay, that's on hoarding.ca, if you meet the criteria, then you don't have to call yourself a hoarder, but what's happening is hoarding. Okay, no ifs, ands, or buts. Regardless of the perceived value of the collections or the price tag on the items. But being overwhelmed by your piles of things does not define you. You're not a failure for it. You are more than your hoarding or any problems that you have. The difference between hoarding and collecting is that collections usually have a social aspect to them. We're proud of our collections. We want to have people in. That it gives us pleasure to display them and share them and discuss them. All right. Can that be said of the piles that might constitute hoarding? Okay. We may also invest in insuring them. They're part of our private and social life. That's probably not true of the piles that constitute hoarding, or the piles that, even if we don't want to call it hoarding, are that interim step in a process that we haven't finished yet. It's just unfinished stuff. Whatever name you call it, if it meets the 3 criteria and you've done it more than, I usually go by the rule of 3, okay? Process number 3 is that the first time something happens, it's an accident. The second time something happens, it's a coincidence. We just didn't have the right information and we made a mistake. It happens, right? None of us is perfect. The third time something happens, it's a pattern. And if it's a pattern, we deal with it if we don't want to keep encountering it and bumping our head on it, okay? So now that you have a closer look at whatever it is, by whatever name you want to call it, if it meets the 3 criteria, the bad news is it is hoarding. All right. You've done your self-assessment. Okay. Ask yourself this. How is your environment affecting your activities of daily living and the quality of your life? Okay. Let's also look at how it might be causing or contributing to the level of depression, anxiety, and isolation that you're feeling with. If COVID wasn't enough, we need another reason, right? Okay. All right. Just repeat who you are, not the label. All right. And what your goals are. All right. Nobody is just the label that any of us qualify for. All right. We are all more than the problems we have. All right. The other thing too is we are all worthy of answers. You're worthy of success. Here's the key thing to remember though. You are also the key element in the success and the answer that will lead to success. You are the key element. It doesn't happen for us. It happens because of us. All right. So we're going to wind up with asking this 3 basic questions. What are they? Write these down, because every time you bump your head on something, every time you want something changed, these are the 3 questions to ask yourself. What do I need in this circumstance, specific to this problem? You are the key player here. You are the key element. What do I need? Where is it? And how do I get enough of it to make a difference? Doesn't have to be perfect. How do I get enough of what I need to make a difference? Okay, let's spend a minute or two and just look at some of these questions in that chat box. Hold on a sec. All right. All right, let me have a look here. Good grief, I'm having. Bring back the puppy. She's so sweet, but she snores like a trucker. She's a Frenchie. She's a Frenchie, Empress knows. Okay. Let me have a look. Can you have OCD with hoarding? Yes, you can. There are there's a list, there's an established list of what we call comorbidities. OCD, for those people who don't know, is obsessive compulsive disorder, okay? There's a list of them. And if you go back in the podcasts, we've done a podcast on the comorbidities. What is the correlation? So depends on whose research you're reading. I did a snapshot of comorbidities as they relate to coexisting with hoarding in Conquer the Clutter. And I found that about 24% of the people who come to me for help, men and women, have discernible factors, criteria for OCD. So they may not tick enough boxes that they actually have OCD disorder, but they certainly are exhibiting behaviors and attitudes that correlate with OCD. So it's a pretty high percentage, but it's not the only show in town. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that, and I learned this at a continuing education training that I did in Boston. It was run by a combination of, I think it was McLean Hospital and Harvard. And it was given by John Rady, who is one of the top, but he's one of the top researchers and therapists for adult ADD and adult ADHD. I was beginning to wonder whether I was imagining the correlation between OCD traits and adult ADD and adult ADHD traits. And it turns out that I wasn't. There's about a 20 to 22% correlation where those traits coexist. So if you are living with, you believe you're living with some level of OCD, the other thing you should be looking at for sure is, are there problematic traits that you're experiencing that you haven't identified that mean that you might also be living with adult, undiagnosed, untreated, adult ADD, adult ADHD? It's not the end of the world. This doesn't make you sicker and sicker and sicker. It just is your particular, it's like a formula. I liken the comorbidities that each one of us has, that combination, to being like a perfume formula. Okay, you better know the formula if you want to gain the upper hand on the parts of it that aren't working for you, because there's all kinds of good information out there on adult ADD and adult ADHD, all kinds of really practical stuff to help you learn to self-assess and manage it, okay? And OCD as well. Okay, here we go. Let me have a look down here Um, Sarah's calling her, I guess her piles crapalanches. Clearly she doesn't like them. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's hard to take care of, tender, loving hug. Oh, yeah. All right, let me have a look. Call it. Joseph, good for you for practice. Yes, compassion, self-talk. You don't get any better at anything by beating yourself up. You just come away feeling even worse. How's that going to sustain you? Okay. I find, getting started is so difficult. Starting, Sarah, is the hardest part for everybody, whether they hoard or they don't hoard. I would love to hear a podcast on developing more effectiveness at the resolution stage. Okay. We will do that. I find that creating routines while reducing clutter is necessary. Yes, it's true, Sarah. The routines are part of developing self-management, self-regulation, and that is one of the key skills in managing your own mind. The confinement due to COVID has helped me to reflect on my own environment, staying and working at reducing crapalanches. Crapalanches, that's so cute. Okay. I have been trying to eat. My mailbox is full? Really? Okay, we'll have to, Jim, maybe we can have a look at that. I hope that hasn't happened again. Okay. Okay, so I think we're going to wind up for now. We will see you next week. Merry Christmas to everybody. If I don't see you again, have a wonderful week. We will see you. What is the date next week? What is the date next week? Hold on a second.
23rd.
23rd. Well, we'll see you on the 23rd. So I'll take back my Merry Christmas only for those people I'm not going to see, and I'll see the rest of you on the 23rd. Take care, everybody. Jim, can we look at that mailbox problem again?
We did, and Donna and I worked on it last night. It should be fine now.
Okay. Okay, so I'll talk to you in a bit about what's happening, that's happening. Okay. Bye, everybody.